Hello, everyone. So today we're going to get into some politics of the mid 19th century, kind of like post intervention type stuff. And we'll try to just kind of wing around through what was going on. Okay, first we're going to talk about in Britain. So in Britain, the monarchy is starting to change a bit. A two-party parliamentary democracy is developing. The Queen is still the head, but in general, we have the prime minister gaining more power, and this is really the era of William Gladstone, who will be the prime minister for most of this. Some of the big things he passes is the Reform Act of 1867, which gives the right to vote for all men who paid regular rents or taxes. This is a big deal. So you don't necessarily have an income requirement anymore, that you just have to be paying any type of rent or tax. So that's crucial. No women yet, but you know. Then you have the Redistribution Act, which created legislative districts like we have in the United States that were relatively equal in population, and then each one gets a representative in parliament, and so that more people are represented in a more equal way. And then, which happens a little bit later, but Gladstone is one that pushes this, the members of the House of Commons will start to get paid in 1911, which opens up that job to more people and getting a more diverse group of people in the House of Commons in general. The big thing he was also trying to push for was Irish Home Rule, but as you saw on my other video about the Irish potato famine, that did not happen. But all in all, for England, still a pretty stable time. France, on the other hand, so when last we left France, they had gotten smashed in the Franco-Prussian War, and now they have to figure out what to do. And something that Otto von Bismarck basically forced upon them as part of the peace treaty was that they get universal male suffrage. I think he was trying to sow a little bit of chaos in France, but we'll see. And so as a result, they have to create a new government, okay? And what they are going to do is to have like one big legislature called the National Assembly, and from there, the National Assembly will try to figure out exactly who is going to run the country, okay? But then in the election results, there were going to be 630 seats, and 400 of them are won by monarchists who want to bring back a king. So again, I don't even know anymore. But a bunch of people were really against that. They were radical Republicans. It was like Republican government or die. They're going to break off and create their own independent government in Paris, known as the Paris Commune. Okay. So they're going to create this commune. They're going to barricade streets in Paris, as you can see in the picture there. They're ready to basically fight to create a government. And initially, the assembly does move to attack the commune, but many working class people then rise up to defend it. And it's pretty intense, with fights breaking out all over Paris and in other places of France. What's interesting enough here, though, even though women aren't really getting the right to vote, well, anywhere, women had a fairly prominent position in the Paris Commune. Many were nurses, but you also had scouts, and you actually had entire brigades of women who would fight, as you see there in the picture on the bottom right. One of actually the key organizers and one of the top leaders for the commune itself was Louise Michel. So you actually have like high-end people that are running it that are women. So we're seeing a little bit of a shift here with the Paris Commune. But it doesn't really work in the end. They are just broken and destroyed. Whoops, sorry. And actually, 20,000 people are killed. 10,000 people are banished to New Caledonia in the Pacific, which was a island group that the French controlled, and Louise was actually one of them. And so that's taken care of, as you can see, all the burning and chaos. But the problem is well, who is gonna be in charge? So initially they're like, all right, we'll use a king. But then there's a complete chaotic, yelling at each other match, and then finally it all breaks out, and so they're like, all right, you know what, we need to do this republic thing. And so what they're going to have is a bicameral legislature. Okay, so the Senate is going to be an upper house, and that is indirect election. So that's going to be the Senate will be appointed by other people who win elections, very similar to the setup of the Senate in the United States under the original Constitution. Then there will be a chamber of deputies, and that is through popular election. Okay, and a lot of the government would function in the same way that you would see the early U.S. government. The first president would be chosen by the legislature, okay, and he would serve for a term of 10 years, or sorry, 7 years. And that first president, Adolphe Thiers, and we've talked about him before, or Thiers. I don't know French. And then you would also get a prime minister who would run internal stuff, okay, and kind of more local stuff. And the first one is Louis Jules Trochu, and they answer to the Chamber of Deputies. And so you do get a Republican-ish type thing. You're not voting for the executive branch, but you're voting for much of the legislature. And so here we go. A French Republic in 1875 has finally been created. Then we wing our way over to Spain. The main king in Spain is King Alfonso XII, and he is going to, in 1875, bring in a new constitution, and a parliamentary government is going to be created. You will have two parties, liberals and conservatives. However, one of the main issues is that suffrage was only for the property class, so you had to own property. So no matter who was in charge, pretty much all policies would favor the wealthy because they're pretty much the only ones that can actually vote. Now, Spain is going to take a big hit in the loss of the Spanish-American War. I mean, they lose the Philippines, Puerto Rico, and Cuba, which were really their key colonies for kind of everything. So that's absolutely devastating for them. It actually causes upheaval against the government and lots of violence, which I'll get into. And then you also have a group called the Generation of 1898, which is a group of artists and writers that were calling for political and social reform, and we're kind of using the loss of the war to try to get Spain to change, to be more the government to be more representative of all the people. Now, initially, you are going to get an expansion of the electorate, but that really doesn't do much. And a lot of this stuff has to do with workers. Spain had been industrializing, so more workers were looking for rights, and that they just didn't have them. And then finally, in 1909, in Barcelona, a straight revolt will break out in June of 1909. Again, it goes back to the low wages, poor work conditions for the people in specifically in Barcelona, but across the rest of the country. You can see here all the fires that are going on in Barcelona. Socialists and anarchists are really growing within the nation. In the end, the military puts it all down, but it's still not there. And in the end, there were no real changes when it was done. They do have a parliament, but everything's pretty much dominated by the Catholic Church, large landowners, and the army. And the key thing here is that they won't really ever develop a strong independent economy. And we talked about this with the fall of the Spanish economy before. And there's going to be issues that come up again in the 1930s that are all established in this mid to late 1800s period. So Italy, they have some major issues internally. And a lot of it is between northern and southern Italy. The north had really started to industrialize, and the conditions were improving. The south was mainly agrarian and really a center of poverty. The Catholic Church actually refused to recognize the existence of Italy and fought against that, not physically, and that's a big deal. Most Italian leaders were from the north, and again, that was problematic for them. And again, particularly for the South, which is a heavy portion of their population. By 1882, only 10% of the people could vote, and as a result of this, long term, Italy can't really take advantage of a lot of the industrialization, imperialism that I'm going to be talking about. Like, they're just kind of hanging there, and what you're going to get is just long-term economic issues just over and over again, and not getting more people involved in voting processes. And that's actually going to open the door for Mussolini in the late teens and early 20s to make a move to eventually take over Italy because of a lot of these issues that aren't addressed during the 1800s. So Germany has a lot of things going on at this time. They still have their emperor, but they are going to have a two-house legislature that is developed at this time. You have the Bundesrat, which is going to be an upper house, kind of like a senate that represents the 25 provinces of Germany. Okay. However, individual states also had their own local king or like governors. And in places like Bavaria and Prussia, they actually ran their own armies and and post offices and stuff like that. So there was still like a little, maybe too many people having power here. Um, and then you had the creation of the Reichstag. So the Reichstag is the lower house. This is elected by universal male suffrage. Um, but they didn't have any control over ministers or the chancellor or anything like that. The people that ran the country really were ministers, which I'll talk about more in a moment, and they only answered to the emperor. The emperor will control the army, control all ministers, and run foreign affairs. So, as much as there was that big streak of unity early on in the 1870s, you still have a lot of kind of chaotic things going on here. And one of those groups that's causing some problem is the German military. They were really big on a half here separateness. They wanted to just make sure that they weren't controlled by any legislative body. That was something that concerned them. They felt that these politicians didn't understand war, and so the general staff was basically developed as a committee of men that ran the army, again, under the emperor and the emperor only. And in order to also keep them apart, they made sure that if you go way back, that the Junkers, who are the big-time landowners and all the way back to the Holy Roman Empire, that they were the ones that controlled the army and the only ones that were loyal. Any other lower officers, it was all about men who, as they were rising through the ranks, showed ultimate loyalty. Okay, just to give you an idea of what they were looking for, here's a quote. Sons of honorable bourgeoisie families in whom love for king and fatherland, a warm heart for the soldier's calling, and a Christian morality are planted and nurtured. That's what they're looking for here. Okay, so again, we got a lot of kind of interesting things going on. But the guy that really is running the show, and we've talked about him a little bit already, is Otto von Bismarck. One of the first things that Bismarck does is something called Kulturkampf, or the struggle for civilization. And this was actually trying to move against the Catholic Church. He saw the Catholic Church as a potential threat. There are still a good number of Catholics in Germany, and that could cause them long-term problems with unity. And so initially, he'll works really hard to ban Catholics from certain institutions. They'll seize Catholic land. But eventually, it actually backfires. It causes some upheaval, and he is forced to abandon those ideas. So ultimately, Kulturkampf will be a failure. 1878, we'll start to see some changes as well. Early on, he was kind of in favor of some, we talked about some of those liberal ideas for like workers and stuff like that, but he's getting nervous because you have an increase of socialists in the country. And Bismarck doesn't like that. And then what really gets him going is in 1878, the Social Democrat Party gets 12 deputies elected to the Reichstag. And socialists in general weren't fans of monarchies, capitalism, or nationalism. All of the things that, Bismarck and Wilhelm I used to unite Germany. And so that bothers him. So right away, he's going to get laws that are pushed through that limited socialist meetings and publications and stuff like that. But he couldn't get them banned from office because that would have been just a little bit too far. And so he's doing as much as he can to fight against these guys. And these are some of those members of the socialists on the right here, of the Socialist Democrat Party. And so he's like, all right, well, what can I do to try to, again, prevent socialism from coming to power, for everybody just to focus on the federal government? We'll get some new benefits for workers here, like sickness, accident, and disability benefits will be created. A pension system is going to be created. It's like similar to the U.S. pension system, which you pay out of contributions from your paycheck while you work. The tough part, and so that's like a really good thing. The tough part, though, is like you only got a full pension. if you got to the age of 70 and you had worked for 48 years, so it's a little crazy. And if a man dies, there's no benefits to widows or children, so that wasn't so good. But despite all of this, socialism is still going to be on the rise. This is going to be an issue that we'll talk about later, and kind of the divisiveness within Germany itself. Bismarck wants to still keep fighting against the socialists, but he is actually removed when Kaiser Wilhelm II comes to power. And so we're going to be seeing massive growth in Germany, but still a little bit of instability, which we want to get into. All right, Austria-Hungary. I mean, like, what's new? What's new, right? What you have here is the ethnic Germans in Austria that basically run everything. They make up 1/3 of the population, and they don't like any growing power of other ethnic minorities of the country. Prime Minister Edward von Taft actually comes in and tries to create an alliance between Germans and conservatives, Czechs and Poles, to try to find a way so that you don't have too much power coming to these other groups. However, they do some things like allowing Slavic languages to be used in like education and administration. And Taft, who's the guy here on the left, figured like if we allow them to at least still speak their language and stuff like that, that can say it's like, okay, we're going to give you this thing, but still the Germans, the Czechs, the Poles, like, will run everything. Unfortunately, the Germans weren't happy about this, and they actually feel that it really should only be German-speaking Austrian bureaucrats that run everything. You shouldn't promote any other language. And Taft gets pushed out, or Taft gets pushed out in 1893. Francis Joseph is trying, he's the emperor at this time, he's trying to keep everything focused and unified. He really focuses on being loyal to the Habsburg family and really trying to use the Catholic Church as a unifier here. Also really working well with the bureaucracy, but he's just trying to continue to put out fires here and there. So you're seeing a lot of instability again. Hungary, on the other hand, starts to talk about this concept of independence. They are becoming more and more nationalistic. They actually had their own functioning parliament. They did keep other ethnicities out in what is known as Magyarization. So what Hungary will focus on is that the Magyar language is the only language for schools, the military, and the government. They're going to do a lot of programs to push forth Hungarian culture. And we're really going to see the beginnings of even, not the beginnings, but the separation between Hungary and Austria is getting more relevant. Of course, we're going to see really the end of that in World War I, but this is a big thing that we're going to continue to see develop. And then finally in Russia, there's just going to be nothing. Okay, Alexander III, again, we've talked about this. He was super angry that his father was assassinated, even though his father had started to put reforms in. So what is he going to do? He's going to massively expand the power and scope of secret police so you can get arrested for basically anything. Anybody who advocates for a constitutional monarchy or social reform, you're persecuted, you're thrown in jail. If you're considered to be revolutionary, like there's no trial, you're just done. He often puts areas of Russia under martial law if he felt that anything treasonous was going on in the area. We talked about the Zemstvos before. He's basically going to cut the power out of all of those, so even local rule, that's done. And specifically in education, even though the Russian people only made up 40% of the empire, drastic measures were put to keep them in charge. Only Russians, no matter what part of the country you were in, could be in major political positions. The Russian language is the only language to be used in schools. Actually, all other languages are banned, and it's crazy. And so for here, we're going to see, again, that the beginnings of the Communist Revolution are getting set because Alexander III is just so harsh on everybody. All right, so that was kind of our quick whip around. We talked about stuff in class, and I'll see you guys soon.